The former Assistant Commissioner John Yates giving evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee now, and take you straight to the Culture, Media and Sport Committee room, where Rupert Murdoch is now to face questions from MPs.
Our understanding was that we would be afforded the opportunity to make an opening statement. We think that, and we prepared on that basis, and we would like the opportunity to make that statement. Would you allow us?
The committee discussed that earlier. We feel we do have a lot of questions, and we hope that all that you would wish to say will come out during the course of questioning. If you feel that is not the case, then you can make a statement at the end. Excuse me, could we not have that, please?
Well, in that case, we would also like to submit the statement in writing, if it pleases you.
That would be perfectly acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could we please remove the people holding up notices?
Is anybody else got a piece of paper they're going to hold up?
Right, after that brief interruption, we will begin. Good afternoon, everybody. This is a special meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. It is a follow-up to the inquiry which the committee held in 2009 into press standards, privacy and libel, during which we took evidence on the extent of phone hacking which had taken place in the News of the World. In our report last year, we stated that we thought it was inconceivable that only one reporter had been involved. In the last few weeks, it has emerged that not only evidence has come out which I think has vindicated the committee's conclusion, but also abuses have been revealed which have angered and shocked the entire country. It is also clear that Parliament has been misled. We are very conscious on the committee that there is an ongoing police investigation and possible criminal proceedings to follow, and this committee would not wish to jeopardise that. However, we are encouraged by the statements that have been made by all the witnesses this afternoon that they wish to cooperate with the committee and help us to establish the truth. So, as our first witnesses this afternoon, can I welcome the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, and the Deputy Chief Operating Officer and Chairman and Chief Executive of News Corp International, James Murdoch. Can I also thank you for making yourselves available to the committee this afternoon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're more than prepared to.
Thank you. Perhaps I might start with Mr. James Murdoch. You made a statement on the 7th of July in which you stated that the paper had made statements to Parliament without being in the full possession of the facts, and that was wrong. You essentially admitted that Parliament had been misled in what we had been told. Can you tell us to what extent were we misled and when you became aware of that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say as well just how sorry I am and how sorry we are to particularly the victims of illegal voicemail interceptions and to their families. It's a matter of great regret of mine, my father's, and everyone at News Corporation. And these are standards, these actions do not live up to the standards that our company aspires to everywhere around the world. And it is our determination to both put things right, make sure these things don't happen again, and to be the company that I know we have always aspired to be. As for my comments, Mr. Chairman, and my statement, which I believe was around the closure of the News of the World newspaper.
Before you get to that, I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
Okay, thank you.
The statement around the closure of the News of the World newspaper, where I stated that that the company had not been in full possession of the facts when certain statements were made to this committee, was referring to the emergence of new facts, largely that came about at the end of 2010 as the due process of a number of civil trials reached their point where document disclosure and evidence disclosure made it apparent to the company and to myself at that time that indeed there was reason to believe that potentially more people had been involved in News of the World illegal voicemail interceptions from before. That was new evidence or new information at the time that postdated the 2009 hearings, and that is what I was referring to. Subsequent to our discovery of that information in one of the civil trials at the end of 2010, which I believe was the Sienna Miller case, civil trial around illegal voicemail interceptions, the company immediately went to look at additional records around the individual involved. The company alerted the police, who restarted on that basis the investigation that is now underway. And since then, the company has admitted liability to victims of illegal voicemail interceptions, has apologized unreservedly, which I repeat today, to those victims, and the company also set up a compensation scheme independently managed by a former High Court judge to be able to deal with legitimate claims coming from victims of those terrible incidents of voicemail interceptions. And those are the actions that were taken as soon as the new evidence emerged. So when I made the statement about not being in the full possession of the facts, it was that those facts at that point were still in the future, and it was in the due process of that civil trial, or the civil litigation process, that evidence really emerged for us, and we acted, and the company acted as swiftly and as transparently as possible.
When this committee took evidence in 2009, we heard from the managing editor of News of the World, Stuart Kuttner, the legal manager of News International, Tom Crane, the News of the World editor, Colin Myler, the former editor, Andy Coulson, and Les Hinton, former chairman of News International. All of them told us that there had been a thorough investigation. No evidence had ever been found that anybody else was involved. That clearly was not correct. Were any of them lying to this committee?
Mr. Chairman, the company relied on three things throughout for a period of time up until the new evidence emerged. The company relied on a police investigation in 2007, and this is before, I'll recount this to try to take us back to that area. This is before I was involved. I became back involved in News Corporation and News International Matters at the end of 2007. In the 2007 period, there was a police investigation. Successful prosecutions were brought against two individuals, and the editor of the News of the World resigned. And the company relied on both the police having closed the investigation and repeated assertions that there was no new evidence for them to reopen their investigation. The company relied on the PCC, which had had a report and had said that there was nothing more to this at the time. And the company relied on the legal opinion of outside counsel that was brought in related to those matters, who, with respect to their review, had issued a clear opinion that there was no additional illegality other than the two individuals involved before. And the company relied on those facts, and for the company in 2008 and 2009, it was not clear that there was a reason to believe that those matters were anything other than settled matters and in the past.
So is it your testimony to this committee that the individuals who gave us evidence in 2009, none of them knew at that time what had been going on?
I do not have direct knowledge of what they knew and at what time, but I can tell you that the critical new facts, as I saw them and as the company saw them, really emerged in the production of documentary information or evidence in the civil trials at the end of 2010. And the duration from 2008 or 2007, I should say, to the end of 2010, and the length of time it took for that to come clear and for that real evidence to be there is a matter of deep frustration. Mine, I have to tell you, I know and I sympathize with the frustration of this committee, and it's a matter of real regret that the facts could not emerge and could not be gotten to my understanding, faster.
Well, you've made clear that it is the case that the information we were given was incorrect, have you established who, as well as Clive Goodman, was involved in phone hacking in the News of the World?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, could you repeat that?
Who, as well as Clive Goodman, was involved in phone hacking in the News of the World?
As I think you made it clear earlier, Mr. Chairman, that there have been a number of arrests of former News of the World employees. These are matters for current criminal investigations, and I think it's difficult for me to comment in particular around some of those individuals.
Have you carried out your own investigation since the discovery of this information to find out the extent of involvement in phone hacking in the News of the World? We have
established a group in the company cooperating very closely with the police on their investigation. Their investigation is broad with respect to journalistic practices, and in particular journalistic practices at the News of the World. And the policy and the direction that the company has given them is to cooperate fully and transparently with the police, to provide information and evidence that the company believes and they believe is relevant to those investigations, sometimes proactively, sometimes in response to those requests. And again, I think the very fact that the provision of the new information to the police in the first place, when there was no police investigation ongoing, that then led to, in part, the reopening of, or this new investigation being established, I hope can be testament to some proactive action and transparency with respect to getting to the right place in terms of finding out the facts of what happened, understanding all of the allegations that are coming in, and moving forward to aid the police in the successful completion of the important and serious work that they're doing.
Okay. And the departure from your company in the recent few days of Tom Crone, of Rebecca Brooks, and of Les Hinton, is that because any of them had knowledge of phone hacking?
I have no knowledge, and there is no evidence that I'm aware of that Mrs. Brooks or Mr. Hinton or any of those executives had knowledge of that. And their assertions, certainly Mrs. Brooks, and assertions to me of her knowledge of those things has been clear. Nonetheless, those resignations have been accepted, but it's important, on the basis that there is no evidence today that I have seen or that I have any knowledge of that there was any impropriety by them.
I'm going to turn to Tom Watson.
Mr. Murdoch Senior, good afternoon, sir. You have repeatedly stated that News Corp has a zero tolerance to wrongdoing by employees. Is that right?
To me, yes.
In October 2010, did you still believe it to be true when you made your Thatcher speech and you said, "Let me be clear, we will vigorously pursue the truth and we will not tolerate wrongdoing"?
Yes.
So if you were not lying then, somebody lied to you. Who was it?
I don't know. That is what the police are investigating, and we're helping them with.
But you acknowledge that you were misled?
Clearly.
Can I take you back to 2003? Are you aware that in March of that year, Rebecca Brooks gave evidence to this committee admitting paying police?
I am now aware of that. I was not aware at the time. I'm also aware that she amended that considerably very quickly afterwards.
I think she amended it 7 or 8 years afterwards. But did you or anyone else?
Sorry.
Did you or anyone else at your organisation investigate this at the time?
No.
Can you explain why?
I didn't know of it. I'm sorry. If I can just say something, and this is not as an excuse, maybe it's an explanation of my laxity. The News of the World is less than 1% of our company. I employ 53,000 people around the world who are proud and great and ethical and distinguished people, professionals in their life. And perhaps I'm spread watching and appointing people whom I trust to run those divisions.
Mr. Murdoch, I do accept you have many distinguished people who work for your company. You are ultimately responsible for the corporate governance of News Corp. So what I'm trying to establish is who knew about wrongdoing and what was involved at the time. So if I can take you forward to 2006, when Clive Goodman was arrested and subsequently convicted of intercepting voicemails, were you made aware of that?
I think so. I was certainly made aware of when they were convicted.
And what did News International do subsequent to the arrest of Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair to get to the facts?
We worked with the police on further investigation, and eventually we appointed, I think very quickly appointed, a very leading firm of lawyers in the city to investigate it further.
Perhaps I can help you.
Well, I'll come to you. I'll come to you in a minute, sir.
Mr.
I'll just let me finish my line of questioning, and I'll come to you. What did you personally do to investigate that after Mr. Goodman went to prison? You were obviously concerned about it.
I spoke to Mr. Hinton, who told me about it.
Okay. Can I ask, in 2008, another 2 years, why did you not dismiss News of the World chief reporter Neville Thurlbeck following the Mosley case?
I'd never heard of him.
Okay. Despite a judge making clear that Thurlbeck set out to blame 2 of the women involved?
I didn't hear that.
A judge made it clear that Thurlbeck set out to blackmail 2 of the women involved in the case.
That is the first I've heard of that.
So none of your UK staff draw your attention to this serious wrongdoing, even though the case received widespread media attention?
I think my son can perhaps answer that in more detail. He was a lot closer to it.
I'll come to your son in a minute. So despite the fact that blackmail can result in a 14-year prison sentence, nobody in your UK company brought this fact to your attention?
The blackmail charge, no.
Do you think that might be because they knew you would think nothing of it?
No. I can't answer. I don't know.
Do you agree with Mr. Justice Eadie when he said that the lack of action discloses a remarkable state of affairs at News International?
No.
Mr. Murdoch, a judge found a chief reporter guilty of blackmail. It was widely reported. He says it was a remarkable state of affairs.
Why didn't he put him in jail?
Because it was a civil case. Were you aware that News International commissioned an investigation into News International emails by Harbottle and Lewis?
Was I?
Aware that News International commissioned an investigation into News International emails by the solicitors firm Harbottle and Lewis?
Yes, I didn't appoint them, but I was told of it happening.
You claimed in the Wall Street Journal that Harbottle and Lewis had made a major mistake. Can I ask what mistake you were referring to?
I think maybe that's a question again for James, but there was certainly, when we examined it, re-examined that, we found things which we immediately went to council with to get advice on how to present it to the police.
In their written response to this committee's questions, are you aware that News International stated that both John Chapman and Daniel Cloak reviewed these emails before forwarding them to Harbottle and Lewis?
No.
So that nobody in the company told you that 2 of your executives had reviewed the emails back at...
I thought that I was under the understanding that everything had been sent to them.
Okay. You are aware that Lord MacDonald QC has since reviewed the emails again on behalf of News International, are you not?
Yes.
You're aware that he stated he found evidence
And
of...
he's reported to the whole board of Newsnet.
He did.
News Corporation.
And you're aware that he stated to the board that he found evidence of indirect hacking, breaches of national security, and evidence of serious crime in the Harbottle and Lewis file?
Oh, he did indeed.
Mr. Watson, please, I can address these in some detail if you would allow me.
I will come to you, Mr. Murdoch, but it's your father who is responsible for corporate governance. I'd like to ask what he knew, but I will come back to you. Who was aware of Harbottle and Lewis findings at News International?
He went to the senior officials of News Corp, certainly the top legal officer.
So Tom Crone or Les Hinton?
No.
No. Were you informed
He
about
was
their...
not, they were not the top legal officers.
Who are the top legal officers?
You can answer that.
Mr. John Chapman was the top legal
John
officer at
Chapman.
News International, and Mr. Crone was the head of legal affairs at News Group Newspapers.
And were you informed about the findings by your son, Mr. Murdoch, or by Rebecca Brooks?
I forget, but I expect it was my son. I was in daily contact with them both.
Okay. When were you informed about the payments made to Gordon Taylor and Max Clifford?
Nope.
You were not informed?
Nope.
At no point you knew that Taylor and Clifford were made payments
I
as a
never
result?
heard of
Okay.
the first one.
You never informed the Chief Executive of News Corp that you authorised payment of £500,000?
Would you like me to answer the questions now, Mr. Watson?
I'd like you to tell me whether you informed your father that you had authorised payment to Gordon Taylor as a result of him being a victim of a crime.
The settlement with Mr. Taylor, and I'm happy to address the matter of Mr. Taylor in some detail if you would like.
First, could you just let me know?
My
First of
father
all, let
became
me know.
aware. My father became aware after the settlement was made in 2009, I believe, after the confidential settlement had become public, as a newspaper reported on the out-of-court settlement afterwards. But please understand that the settlement of an out-of-court settlement of a civil claim of that nature and with that of that quantum is something that normally in a company our size, the responsible executives in the territory, in the country, would be authorized to make, and that's the way the company has functioned, and it's below the approval thresholds, if you will, that would have to go to my father as chairman and chief executive of the global company.
There are other questions I could ask on this, but there are other colleagues who have specific questions to you, Mr. Murdoch, about this issue, so I'll move back to your father if I can. Mr. Murdoch, at what point did you find out that criminality was endemic at News of the World?
Endemic is a very wide-ranging word, and I also had to be extremely careful not to prejudice the course of justice which is taking place now. That has been disclosed. I became aware as it became apparent. The first two, and then I was absolutely shocked, appalled and ashamed when I heard about the Millie Dowler case only 2 weeks ago, 8 days before I saw them. It was graciously received by the Dowlers.
Did you read our last report into the matter where we referred to the collective amnesia of your executives who gave evidence to our committee?
I haven't heard that, but
Nobody brought
I
it to your
don't made
attention.
that particular charge. But it's,
So a parliamentary inquiry found your senior executives in the UK guilty of collective amnesia and nobody brought it to your attention. I don't see why you
no.
think that's not very serious.
Yes, but you're really not saying amnesia. You're really saying lying.
Well, we found your executives guilty of collective amnesia. I would have thought that someone would like to bring that to your attention, that it would concern you. Did they forget?
No.
Okay. Whilst it has been obvious to most observers from the summer of 2009 that phone hacking was widespread, you knew for sure in January of this year that the One Rogue Reporter line was false. Is that right?
I forget the date.
Why was Edmondson the only person to leave News of the World last January?
Mr. Watson, we have given all our files and all our knowledge and everything to the police. They have not given us the Mulcair diaries, so we do not know what was in that. And that, but there was a page which appeared to be addressed to him. Again, that's my son's.
Mr. Watson, perhaps it would be, and Mr. Chairman, perhaps it would be helpful to the committee if you would like to go through any of the particular detail around why decisions were made by the management team at News International and the precise chronology. It would be more helpful, perhaps, if I could answer those questions as the chief executive of the regional businesses across Europe. I have somewhat more proximity to it.
I understand the detailed points.
I'm simply
Mr.
offering to
Murdoch,
help to clarify these matters, Mr.
Your
Watson.
father is responsible for corporate governance, and serious wrongdoing has been brought about in the company, and it's revealing in itself what he doesn't know and what executive chose not to tell him. So with respect to you, I will pursue my line of questioning and come back to you later. Mr. Murdoch, why was no one fired in April when News International finally admitted that News of the World had been engaged in criminal interception of voicemails?
It was not our job to get in the course of justice. It was up to the police to bring the charges and to carry out their investigation, which we were 100% cooperating with.
But in April, the company admitted liability for phone hacking, and nobody took responsibility for it then. No one was fired. The company admitted that they'd been involved in criminal wrongdoing, and no one was fired. Why was that?
There were people in the company which apparently were guilty, and we have to find them and we have to deal with them appropriately.
Mr. Watson, if I can clarify, most of the individuals involved or implicated in the allegations that were there had long since left the company. Some that were still there, you mentioned one, exited the business as soon as evidence of wrongdoing was found, and a process was set up in cooperation with the police to aid them with any of those things that they wanted to do. But many of the individuals that were potentially implicated in those civil litigations and potentially in these criminal matters had already left the building and were not in the News of the World at this time. And current News of the World, our News of the World executives and journalists at the time, many of whom were not there in 2006 and 2007. So it was that some of them had already left.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Murdoch, why did you decide to risk the jobs of 200 people before pointing the finger at those responsible for running the company at the time of the illegality? Your son and Rebecca Brooks.
When a company closes down, it is natural for people to lose their jobs. We have, in this case,